Welcome to What's Important to You, the podcast where we explore purpose, passion, and the moments that truly matter. I'm James Dean, and each week I sit down with inspiring guests to uncover what drives them, inspires them, and what's important to them. What does it take to build a strong, lasting relationship in a world that constantly pulls us in different directions? In today's episode, we explore connection, communication, responsibility, and why many relationship problems aren't really communication problems at all. We discuss how small daily actions can strengthen trust, deepen intimacy, and help couples move from surviving to thriving. Today, we find out what's important to relationship coach, author, and founder of Save the Marriage, Lee Baucom. Hi, Lee. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, delighted you're here. Really looking forward to this. So we're going to dive straight in, Lee, with the first question, which is, Lee, what's important to you?
Yeah, so I've spent my career doing one thing, helping people have better marriages, because that's what's important to me. I have been married now for over 38 years and have watched a number of other marriages fall apart. I'm happily married. My parents were happily married, but we had a couple of blow-ups in my family when I was younger with my uncles and my aunts. And so that made it very clear to me what happens when marriages go sideways. So I trained as a therapist, switched over to coaching because I wanted to find better ways of helping marriages to flourish. Got two big interests in my life. How do people thrive in life and how do they have great marriages? And those come together when I get to help people work on their marriage.
It's such a huge piece because I think at the moment, and I don't know if it's just what I see on the algorithm of the social medias I see, but it's very much, I think, from in the sort of conversation at the moment about divorce rates and things like that and relationships. And that maybe it's always been there, but maybe I'm just becoming a bit more aware of it as such. But would you say you trained as a therapist first and then into coaching? Was that always the intention to go into this area and this field about marriage? Or was that something you kind of moved into?
So I knew when I was in college that I wanted to work with people as a therapist. So that meant grad school for sure.
Yeah.
But when I was in grad school, a lot of times you're trained as either an individual therapist or a marriage and family therapist. It's two very different realms.
Yes.
And so I spent my first master's and part of my second one really doing a lot of individual work. And I got interested in a systems approach, like how are they interrelated and interconnected? It turns out, as I've stepped back, that's true with the individual too. You've got so many places where you're fitting into different systems, even within yourself. So that approach made more sense to me. And so I specialized in marriage and family work. Now, the reason I think I was so captivated was because I saw the damage of those blow-ups when I was pretty young. I have a couple of cousins that I don't even know where they live because the explosive nature of that. And so I saw the destruction in the family. And I realized that a lot of the struggles that people have in that individual work are tied to the relationships they either grew up in or that they're currently relating in. And so when I started boiling it down, I'm like, what is that pivot point? For most people, the most important intimate relationship in their life is their marriage. And if that goes sideways, it's hard to have a thriving life. And by the way, if your life is struggling, it's sometimes hard to have a great marriage. And so those two pieces became very interrelated in my mind. My switch, you talked about the therapy to coach, as I had mentioned. My switch was because the kind of the dark secret is that marital therapy, statistically speaking, is not effective in changing the outcome. And I wanted to figure out what actually does make a difference.
Yeah, that's interesting. That is an interesting perspective. That the two different sort of modalities in a sense of potential then success rate. Because I suppose from your perspective, then from you're trying to I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you're trying to obviously get people to effectively have a positive marriage and effectively make it work, and for them ideally to stay together if that's the right thing.
And that's a very good distinction you made. So I do have and do lead the Save the Marriage system. So A lot
Mm,
of times people assume that I think that everybody should stay married. And the fact is,
mm,
I don't believe that every marriage can be saved.
mm,
I know two things. One is more marriages could be saved than are and could have a good relationship. For me, it's not okay to just avoid divorce. I think you
mm,
want to make a shift from a hurting marriage to a healthy marriage. That's an important shift. But even if a marriage can't survive, having worked on the core issues, having resolved some of those issues makes it more successful to leave. It makes it a better leaving. So when I watched my uncle several times and a couple aunts several times in their relationships, they didn't end well. And
mm,
the damage was because they didn't figure out how to restore their marriage, but they also didn't figure out how to end it in a healthy way.
yeah,
Those are two possible outcomes. So just to kind of, it's not a what happens in therapy as just a kind of a can you just stay married?
yeah,
Here are the statistics. 50% of people who go to, and this is according to a meta analysis of studies. So, a study looking at all the other studies,
yeah,
several of
yeah.
those came up with the same conclusion that 50%, about 50% of people who go to marriage therapy still end up divorced. That's very similar to the divorce rate in general. So, nothing's changing there. And only 10 to 15% report that it helped.
Mm,
So, we're looking at statistically no change in the outcome.
mm,
And then we're looking at statistically a low number of people who say it even improved their relationship. To me, that tells me that that's going after the wrong thing. And if we can
mm,
improve relationships, we need to find some ways of doing that.
yeah, absolutely. And because it's interesting, we're going back to what you said at the start around relation to the type of the sort of education piece when you're training in therapy, the sort of either the individual or in the sort of couple. But it's kind of you kind of alluded to a little bit. It's like both will have an impact on each other. It's almost like you can't really separate them in some ways. The individual, if someone has any sort of individual challenges or issues or whatever's going on with themselves, it's going to have an impact in the relationship and vice versa. So it's kind of you can't, as much as there's separate sort of ways of looking at it, they're kind of meshed together in the same, aren't they?
They are. So,
Yeah,
one of the things that often is the case is that people who are doing couples work, they are marital
yeah,
therapists, were actually trained as individual therapists, and it just happened that there were people coming to them as a couple to be seen. And
yeah,
because of the way we license therapists in most places that do that licensure, you're just licensed as a therapist. So if you want to say
yes,
you're a marriage therapist, you don't have to have the training to do it. You just say, I'm a marriage therapist. The problem is there is a shift in the mentality that goes into that. And
mm,
so, what you're pointing to is whether somebody carries that individual mentality, which is basically a psychopathology approach, like what's wrong with you psychologically. And
mm,
suddenly you have two people in your office and you're trying to apply this theory that is based on what's wrong with people and
mm,
not what's wrong with the relationship. Couples
yes,
therapists, when they're trained as couples therapists in a systems approach, see that what's in their office is the system. In
mm,
fact, that is one way I often suggest that people ask about their expertise when they're looking for a marriage therapist. Ask them the simple question, who's your client? And if they're an individual therapist, they're going to struggle. They're going to say who contacts me, or they're going to say the two people in my office. And the reality is it's the relationship. That's a
mm,
systems approach. We're looking at how these two people interact with each other, along with how the other systems in their life interact too. And that's the way a systems theory works. But that's true with an individual too.
sure,
So
yeah,
you're just
absolutely,
one big system, right? I mean, you've got all
yes,
these parts to you that are all interacting. And I remember back when I was doing training, I was working in a hospital and we started asking the question, what if some of what we're seeing as depression, even schizophrenia is tied to the biology of the gut, of the
mm,
system, of infections in the body rather than just is it something that's in the mind, right?
mm,
That's a systems approach to looking at a broader path. So that whole
yeah,
systems approach just is how we're built.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, and no, it's interesting to say that because I see it now in relation to you say that about the relationship piece versus because the worry there, or when you say if someone's just looking at it from an individual perspective, then you may be helping each individual, but you're not necessarily working on the reason the two people are there in the sense of the relationship itself. And if anything, you could be wedging them further apart if you don't have that necessarily that training of coming from that systems perspective. Because they could be perfectly well, I feel great now, but I don't want to be with them type thing, you know?
In fact, I often see it when somebody is trained as an
Yeah.
individual therapist that they feel like they have to side with somebody in the room. Like they're
Mm,
these two people, and they generally side with the person who says, "Yeah, I don't think I want to be in this marriage," right? But
right.
let's just take it a little bit further down that road.
Yeah.
That part of what is missing from this is my core understanding of why people get into trouble is not a
Yeah.
communication problem, which is what often happens in therapy. They teach communication skills. It's
Mm,
disconnection. The couple has become
mm,
disconnected, and everything else that they're bringing into the room is often a symptom of that disconnection, even though that is often out of the realm of what people understand. So let's say they come in and they're fighting about money. Their fight about money is not a communication issue about money. It's not even about the money. It's about the disconnection and the way they misunderstand their relationship that's a problem. If they're disconnected, then they start feeling like they're in a tug of war. So I believe if you put any two people together, there are one of two things that could happen. They're either going to come together as a team or they're going to
mm,
become oppositional with each other. So if they don't join together as a team, they're going to be oppositional with each other. And
mm,
then the fights emerge on the different issues. And so then therapists try to teach them communication skills, but they're not approaching the core issue of that disconnection, of not being a team together. And
yeah.
if you're not trained to move someone in that direction, you don't even know to look for that.
Yeah. It's a when you say that, it's a really evocative word, connection and disconnection, isn't it? When it comes to a relationship, because as you say, it's because in some ways there could be ways of better communicating, arguably. So you could teach someone how to communicate better, and so you're having a more arguably rational conversation and not shouting. But if if the layer below is still disconnected, all you're doing is having a quote unquote politer conversation, but it's not actually leading anywhere because the layers underneath is there's still you're just going to be maybe more articulate in your opposition, and it could become more courtroom like in my head. Do you know what I mean? It's like, well, but we're still trying to basically prove where I'm right and where you're wrong versus the fundamental challenges, as you say, is that disconnection.
So let me see if I can phrase it differently because this is a
Yeah,
conversation, excuse me, this is a conversation I've often had with couples. They'll come in and they're like, you need to teach us to communicate better.
yeah,
I'm like, if I teach you to communicate better, all I'm going to teach you is how to argue better.
mm,
That's not changing what's underneath it. So
yes,
communication is pipes. It's just piping. It's delivering something, right? So
yes,
we have pipes in houses and they deliver good stuff or take away bad stuff. That's the idea. As
yeah,
long as they're hooked up to the good stuff and taking away the bad stuff, as long as they're hooked up right, they're just a delivery device. And so our communication skills are just delivering something. And the question is, what are we delivering? If we're delivering connection, great. Communication can help that. The problem is, most people have decent communication skills. I've sat with couples who say, we need to learn to communicate better. I'll sit with them for 20, 25 minutes and I'm like, I've understood every word you said. You've understood every word you've said. You're communicating just fine. But what you're communicating is the hurt and the disconnection. If we get you connected, then the communication takes care of itself because now you're communicating something different. And so we're aiming at the wrong thing. Why do people struggle in communication? Because they're disconnected. You can't change the communication and improve the disconnection. You approach the disconnection and talk about ways of reconnecting,
yes.
and the communication takes care of itself.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great analogy using there the pipes in the house of the delivery system. So if that's, would you say then that's the, if you were to say about where people struggle in relationships, is that the number one thing, that disconnection?
It is, and let's talk about why that is. So,
Yeah,
because,
please.
you connect, right? You meet somebody and you're connecting and you're building up this relationship. And the more you build a relationship, the more the connection grows. The more connection grows, the closer you feel. And so then one day you say, hey, let's make this for the rest of our lives because we got this good thing going. So then you go to a pretty short ceremony for the fact that it completely changes how you are in relation to this person and to the world. Now you're this unit, this team together. And so now you have to go into the world with what I'll often refer to as on the job training with no supervision, right? There's nobody saying, hey, you guys are making mistakes as you're doing this, right? So you're just off doing your thing. And
Yes.
one of the things that often happens is a couple goes, okay, we've got our relationship down. Like we're here
Mm,
and we need to take the energy we were putting into building our relationship and we need to do the parenting thing, the job thing, the friends, the hobbies, the aging parents, the whatever it is that's been put off to the
mm,
side while we're building this relationship. And there is, it's not that you have to continue to spend the same energy into that, but people have a hard time figuring that piece out. And so they hit what I call the pause button on their marriage.
mm,
We'll come back to us at this point, right?
mm.
So we'll hit the pause on us and we'll go do the parenting thing. We'll build our careers to this point. And the problem is the when we'll come back to us is always just down the road. When
Mm,
the kids are out of diapers, when they're in school, when they're out of school, on that goes. When my career is here, well, when it's here, well, when it's here, because in the meantime, while we were building all that connection and building these habits of connection, then we suddenly shift to habits of disconnection, which creates more disconnection.
mm.
And we humans are built in connection. We need connection. There is no other creature on this planet that I know of that takes 18 years to hit a point when we go, yep, you can go do your own thing, right? Or 18
Yeah,
plus years these days,
yeah.
because we learn in connection. We mature in connection. And so when this primary relationship that is supposed to be so deeply connected is suffering from disconnection, we're aware of the pain that we're feeling of that disconnection, not our contribution to the disconnection, but the pain of it.
Yeah.
And so we go, oh, you don't want to connect with me. Well, that's hurtful. Why don't you want to connect with me? And so then we start personalizing that process that we likely were a part of too. We just didn't recognize it. So when that pain is setting in, we start distancing, and then the
Mm,
distance only grows. And then the hurt only grows. And then we get into this cycle of disconnection that leads all the way down to feeling disdain. So you're
yeah.
disappointed at the top side of it, and then you feel disdain at the bottom side. And somewhere along there is when people go, wait, this marriage is not where it needs to be. And
Mm,
then the question is, do they say, let's see if we can get back on board? Or do they say, yeah, I'm out of here? That's,
mm.
that's the point.
Yeah, yeah. And the question then is, but even before we get into the sort of more so what you do when you're with couples when they're in your room, from all the sort of work you've done over the years in this field, if people are kind of wanting to be conscious of it, to not lose that disconnection and not get to that point where they think that sort of pivot point, do we stay or do I go? How do people stay connected is the question.
Yeah, it is completely legitimate for people to say we can't continue putting the energy into our relationship that we used to build it. So that is absolutely
Mm,
true. And so the question asks, so what do we need to do to sustain our relationship?
mm,
And so sustaining habits, like how do we check in with each other? How do we make sure that
mm,
we prioritize our relationship? So most people can think of a couple that when they hit parenthood became only parents, not spouses. They refer to each other as mom and dad or, parents to each other and use all these reference points. And so that is a place to be able to say, no, we're still a couple. And this is the priority relationship in the house. That's the first big move, is to say the most important relationship The relationship, not the most important person, but the most important relationship in the house is our marriage. As our marriage goes, the family goes. So that's an orientation difference. And then the question is, so how do we show that? Like, how do we
Mm,
check in with each other? Sometimes couples will say, when we get home in the evenings, we have 15, 20 minutes to catch up with each other, not just to say what we did today, but to talk about how our day went. Like, how was that for us? To get that emotional support, to make sure that we leave time for each other, for hanging out together, whether that's going on a date or it's hanging out at home together. How do we prioritize staying connected on the three levels of spiritual of connection, which is physical, emotional, and spiritual? Those three levels. How do we continue to keep those going? When they do that, everything kind of congeals around that.
yeah.
And the problem is that they often hit the pause button because they're not aware. So, the Eisenhower boxes, that, right?
Yes.
So there's the important but not urgent.
Yes.
And a lot of times couples are spending a lot of time on the urgent and important, and a lot of time on the urgent but not important. And they forget that this is not urgent, but it is important
Yes.
until it suddenly is urgent,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's so
Yeah.
hurting. And so being able to say, okay, we've got to keep an eye on this. Yes, we've got to take care of the kids and what they need immediately, but our relationship is a priority and it is the important relationship in the house. If they do that and work together as a team, they won't see me.
Yeah.
The ones who forget to do that are the ones that cross my path.
Yeah. Absolutely. Is there an element of, when I was thinking there, were you saying that because, and I completely agree with what you're saying. And so been married now 13 years, but we've been together for coming up 24 years. It'll be this year, myself and my now wife. And it's that element, as you say, with not just say the communication, the connection of having those moments of talking to each other, engaging with each other, having things that you do together or things you do separately as well, and all those things. But there's an element of what you're saying. There's almost like there's a practicality to it. There's an intentionality about it. And sometimes I think, is there a part of people who almost have still the sort of romanticized picture of their relationship that it almost, by doing these things almost quite sort of intentionally or practically, almost it's not as romantic, if you know what I mean. Like, versus, well, actually, no, but by scheduling some of these things, whether it's, to go on a date or to hang out, as you say, or had to have a conversation, by doing it, it's putting it there. Because if you just think it'll be just float along, as you say, it's actually, you've paused it without even realizing. You just think, when it'll happen, it'll be fine. So there's an element of, actually, if we're practical, a bit more practical and logical about this, those things will work out. Well, because we'll have those conversations, we'll have those moments, versus just hoping it will happen.
So here's the interesting thing about, you're correct. A lot of people will say, I don't think we should have to schedule time. It should just happen naturally.
Yeah.
And I will remind them that that's not how they started their relationship. They asked each other to go out. They asked each other to hang out. I mean, there was an intentionality to that. I remember it for me. I was like, okay, when can I next see this person? Right? Let's set that up. Let's get that going. And of course, I was carried away with the feelings that are associated with that. That's why we do that. But the fact is that we were planning on how we got together. And I would say, hey, let's go for a walk, or can we go to a movie on Friday night, or let's go to dinner. All of those things were planned things. We just kind of forget it because we're caught up in the emotionality of it. And
Yes.
to feel like you still have to plan it feels like there's something artificial, when that is what we do in the rest of life. What do you do if you want to make sure you make it to the gym? You make room in your schedule to go to the gym. What do you do if you want to make room you want to walk your dog? We talked about that before, right?
Yeah.
In the morning, I go walk my dog. That's in my schedule. And so that's the process we do for anything important in life. So can those feelings of attraction and connection sustain? Sure. But it's because you put intentional energy behind it.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think yeah, it is. I love that word as well. You said about that intention, because there's something, there's putting meaning behind something, really sort of wanting to do that. Going back to then sort of the couples, because obviously you moved into you said from therapy and then more into coaching side of, because you were thinking the statistics, going back to the statistics you mentioned, that therapy wasn't necessarily really improving the statistics on people staying together. And then even then the sort of positive outcomes were even lower. So when you put a sort of a more of a, is it the coaching sort of perspective on it, what's the sort of difference you can see from the approach that you take that and potential success rates?
Great question. There are a couple of things that immediately are true. So you can't go to marriage therapy without your spouse.
Mm,
I can do relationship coaching without a spouse.
yeah.
So one of the problems with marriage therapy, one of them, are a number, but one of them is when you drag, coerce, force, convince a spouse to go to therapy, they're not in the process the way you would want them to be. And so what do we do? There's a psychological reactance is the term. Psychological reactance is that I will push against something I feel like is being imposed upon me, even if I
Mm,
know it's good for me. That's just human nature. Like you're telling me to do that. There's a part of me going, I know I should do that. But there's the other part of me, the human part going, don't tell me what to do. And we push back. So for years, while I was training and even early days of therapy, sure enough, the spouse would be there and be, sitting with their arms crossed and not really wanting to be there. And their spouse was hoping I would convince them to be there. The problem is
mm,
any attempt to convince has them push back, and that causes more problems. So I have a very simple rule. I work with a couple if both people are ready to move forward. That doesn't mean they're promising to stay married. They're ready to move forward with addressing their issues. If they're not ready, I'll work with whoever is because there's a lot that can be done on one side. So that's a shift.
yeah.
Another shift that is true in coaching, and this is not an absolute, but but the fact is that therapy is often looking backward and coaching
Yep.
is often looking forward.
Yeah.
And so do I avoid the past as a coach? No. Do I want to dissect the past and only be focused on that? No. Early on, I remember thinking, I'm hearing the next couple, out in my waiting room, and they're laughing together and joking and getting along. And then they come into my office and they start telling me about how the week went. And the spiral starts downward. And they leave upset with each other, frustrated with each other, and done with each other. That just never felt to me to be productive. So that's part of what I see as a difference. I don't have to say, so how did your week go? I can ask,
Mm,
where do we want to go this week? How do we want to move forward with this? And maybe do one other piece that is a problem with therapy. Therapy is not designed. In fact, you're encouraged to not give advice,
mm,
to not have really an opinion. I mean, you're supposed to stay neutral is the therapeutic term. You're supposed to stay neutral. So first of all, most people in a marriage, first of all, don't know how to have a good marriage. And second, don't know what to do when the marriage gets into trouble. They don't have that information. They need information. They need somebody to
mm,
say, here's the roadmap, right? They need advice. So that's the first. The second is that I think that you should be on the side of the relationship when you're there for the relationship, not neutral.
mm.
So just to kind of go with a medical analogy, if I walk into the doctor's office and my arm's at this really weird angle and the doctor's like, yeah, I mean, it's broken. Do you want to do something about it? We can go either way. That is not what I want. I want a doctor going, let's fix that arm and get you back
Yeah.
to where you need to be, right? That's
Yes.
they're on the side of my health. So I
Yes.
think a therapist should be on the side of the relationship to see what could happen. That doesn't mean they force a couple to stay together, but they should be on the side of the relationship to see what can happen. And
Yeah.
if they come to the point of going, yeah, it's not going to work, then they can talk about how to treat the relationship in a positive way on an exit strategy.
Mm. Yeah. No, absolutely. It's, as you say, it's putting the few things are there. One, the sort of future, looking for the how we're going to move forward, as opposed to, as you say, that question of how did the week went, as an opportunity for each person to just give it both barrels about the other person again and just have a rant about them, and that how arguably productive or will that be, versus okay, well, what's how do we go forward, and even opening it up of like, well, what are we going to talk about today? What do you want to talk about? It's like the thing of, and that sort of more forward thinking mindset. But again, bringing it back to the focus as opposed to one person or the other, or trying to prove who's right or who's wrong, but about the core fundamentals of why you're together is this relationship piece. So it's kind of like, and also not sort of sugarcoating it. It's like, given the reality is like, you don't have to be together. Let's be this absolutely clear. But it's like, if you want to, and if you really want to have what either you had before or something that you're looking for together, then that's the piece. Like it's, because you can sort of shout and scream and complain about the other person all you like, but if the real core is that you want to stay together, then
Hmm.
focus on that.
How would you treat
That's
that? Yeah.
exactly, if it was a separate entity, almost, yes.
Yeah, well, and so, I mean, legally speaking, there is a separate entity of your marriage that's created in that
Yes.
marriage ceremony, right? And so I talk about that as being the we, like we are in this
Mm,
together. We are a team. That's a mentality I carry. So let's
yes.
take it into the sports for a minute, and I want to wrap back to the who's right, who's wrong kind of question. But
Yeah.
let me go with the sports thing first.
Yeah.
When you are on a team, you don't give up your own individual identity, but you're playing on the team for the goal of winning, right?
Mm.
And so how do I do that? Okay, so I play pickleball. I mean, and me and the rest of the world right now is playing pickleball. But one of the things I like about that is I've got this partner, right? And our job is to win the match. In order to do that, we need to play well together. I need to support my partner and I need to play my best. So, yesterday I was out playing. I got to play with my wife, and we had this person that was across from us, and we were 3 points in. And I went, we're going to win this, not because we were better, but because I was watching the other side. And one person was very upset about how things were going and was taking it out on himself and his partner, and was clearly not. And in fact, our last point, I was like, did he actually mean to miss that shot, or did he just misfire? Because it looked pretty obvious. He was so disgusted to be losing, instead of going, how do we bring this back? Right. And so how do we do that best? When I step out, as soon as we start the warm up, I'm going, okay, what do I need to cover today for this person? And if my knee is bothering me, I might say, I'm not going to be so fast to catch those on the side. And so we can talk and communicate about where we are each time. So playing your best doesn't mean you're always at your optimal, but you're
Yes.
playing your best at where you are for
Yeah.
the goal of winning, right? So that's how you do that, which, back to the who's right, who's wrong. Watching the other side of the court, there was an assigning of blame.
Yeah.
And there were several times that I was going, okay, yes, his partner missed the shot, but he set it up. Like, he had a bad
Yeah.
shot, and he was pointing to, why did you miss that? And I'm like, well, because you gave me a ball that was just begging to be hit. Right. And
Yeah.
so she didn't have a chance, but she got the blame.
Yeah.
That often happens in the who's right, who's wrong. We forget that there's a prelude to that. But there's another piece
Yeah.
that I think is even more interesting. Research shows that around 70 of arguments that couples have do not have a solution. They are
Mm.
differences of opinion, different viewpoints, different perspectives. There is no right or wrong. There are different ways you're viewing the situation. And that could be alarming for people, or it could be freeing for people. I hope it's freeing for people to say, wait, how many arguments are we getting invested in trying to prove who's right or who's wrong, when there is not a who's right or who's wrong? There are just different opinions that could be shared. So it's not that those 70% should never be a discussion point, but the question is, can I be curious about how my spouse sees things enough to understand it and listen for the possibility that there may be a better perspective for me to see?
Yeah.
And that's an internal perspective that only happens when you feel like you're a part of a team? Can my spouse have a better viewpoint on something? And instead of arguing, maybe I should listen.
Mm.
So most couples struggle with conflict. I have yet to have a couple who comes in and says, you know, we really like conflict. They will tell me they have a lot of conflict, but not that they like
Yeah.
it. But conflict can serve the purpose of the relationship if you see conflict as a way of moving the relationship to something better.
Mm.
That's where conflict can actually help the relationship. But because we're so averse to conflict, we don't want to have the fights, we don't want to have the discussions, we miss the opportunities for growth that are a part of that. But only when you have the mindset that conflict serves the relationship by getting us to a better place.
Mm. Absolutely. Like it's, and I loved again the comparison, the analogy using the sports, and and you said it earlier in in the chat as well about the whole thing of a team, and I very much I kind of approach it in that way as well. And the interesting thing there you said about the conflict and the avoidance of it, thinking in the belief, well, if we don't fight or if we don't disagree or if we don't have an argument, then the relationship is okay. So, but what you're doing is then having potentially an internal argument in your head. So it's not like you're not having that emotional response. You're just not verbalizing it. And so it's like, and then it can go, and if anything, if you're constantly having almost these sort of internal disagreements with this person who you're supposed to have this, as you say, really close, intimate relationship with, then surely that's just going further into that disconnection you talked about earlier. Because the conflict piece doesn't mean it'd be madness to think that you're going to agree on everything. It'd be lunacy and arguably really boring as well. Like, you know what I mean? Like if everything was the same, do you know what I mean? Like, so it's not, and you say, it's an interesting statistic about the sort of argument thing of the majority. There's no sort of definite sort of right or wrong. It's just, as you say, a difference of opinion or perspective or whatever. And I think, as you say, I would be definitely on the side. That's quite a freeing statistic or a piece of information, because it's having that ability to have the difference of opinion, but still be connected. And
Mhm.
so I think it's kind of like, to me, it's the long way of saying it's healthy to have some things that are different between the two of you, that you don't agree on anything or everything, should I say.
Well, and that's so. I was doing some consulting with companies I've done over the years, and I was talking with
Mm,
a partnership, and the two. So partnerships are in some
mm,
ways like a marriage. You know, you're in this together for
Ye-
the success of the business. So
yeah,
there's some differences, but there's a place of going our company, our place,
yeah.
right? And so they were talking to me and they're like, well, we never disagree. And I said,
Mm,
okay, well then one of you is not necessary. I mean, that's the honesty is
mm,
you're not both necessary here because you're not bringing anything new to the table. If you're neither are disagreeing, and by the way, I don't believe that you agree on everything. You're just not discussing what you disagree on. And that's what often happens in a marriage. We're just going to kind of pretend like there's no disagreement, but you're right that internally it's still
mm,
spinning around. And so to go back to that statistic, if 7 out of 10 arguments you have are not solvable, it is fair to ask the question, is this solvable? Do we have to come up with something to solve this? Or is this a question of opinion? Because you can handle those in two different ways. If it's solvable, then there's an answer, right? There's something
mm,
you need to come down to. Solvable, like how are we going to save money for retirement and have some money to spend
yeah,
now? How are we going to do that? That is, you need to decide that. That's just not a theory base, right? That is a
yeah,
future planning. So how are we going to solve that? That is one question. Differences of opinion on, say, how you parent. Maybe that's something you share. And so I've had the discussion before. I'll, ask a couple and I'm like, can you solve this? I mean, is this solvable? And after I talk about it, sometimes they go, no, you're right, it's not. And then that's a discussion point of why do I see it this way? Why do you see it this way? What makes sense? And how do we kind of understand each other's perspective? Okay, that can happen. Or they say, yes, it's solvable. But the more I listen, what they want as a solution is for the other person to come around to their perspective.
yeah,
That's the solve. That's
yeah,
that's just pretending that there's a way to solve it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and we're still at the same point of no, they're actually this is just two different opinions. And is there room for that to coexist in your relationship? How you do the parenting, like you've got a child who's done something and that needs a response. Yeah, that needs agreement. Your basic kind of what does it mean about child development and other things? There's a lot of different of opinions out there. And
Yeah.
to have a discussion about how you're viewing that helps you finally make that 30% choice because you've
Yes.
come to understand the 70% that are differences of opinion, differences of values, of perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always interested when I talk to people about the sort of like yourself, the before and the after picture. So are there obviously without going into specifics of naming anyone or naming couples, but is there any ones that come to mind you think of, when you saw them the first sort of meeting or consultation and then at the end of it and the difference in themselves after working with you, how they were as individuals, how you saw them, like whether it be the way they held themselves, how they spoke, what's the sort of biggest beginning and after you've seen?
So I'm going to use the extreme example.
Yeah.
Years ago, I was in an office, had the sign, hanging on the street that said that the counseling center was there. It happened that this couple pulls in, this couple comes in and finds me, and I happen to not have anybody there. And I said, "So, what brings you in today?" And they said, "We're headed to the attorneys to sign the divorce papers." And on our way, we're like, "Well, let's just see what's possible." So, just to say, there instead of they've given up and they're going to the divorce attorneys, there's clearly a part of them that did not want that, right? So we
Mm,
talked about why that was. And so then as we continue to have a conversation, at the end of the 50 minutes, I said, it sounds like you're not quite convinced that that's the right answer. So why don't you postpone that? Just let's postpone it for a month. And so they postponed it for a month and we worked together. And that month ended up being several months. Transformation was they went from being angry, hurt, resentful of each other to seeing how each other fits together, why they found each other. They kind of went back to why did we even get together? We did have to talk some about how they had paused the relationship. That's one of the early moments when I went,
mm,
oh, you didn't mean for this to happen. Nobody sets out, nobody walks down the aisle going, well, we'll probably be divorced in a couple of years. They wouldn't do it. Right. And
yeah,
so
yeah,
they
yeah.
they thought that they had it all put together and where that fell apart around parenting and around career choices. And then we could talk about because of them being able to see how both of them had done that, they could talk about how they had fallen out of connection with each other. So then we were talking about how do you reconnect? And I remember the first session, it's not that they came in angry, but the anger was about two clicks down from the surface.
Mm,
They were not outwardly hostile, but it was pretty resentful on the inside. So after they took accountability with each other about how they both had been a part of that, they began to think through how they used to connect and how they might want to do that again. So it was just like little experiments along the way. Like,
mm,
let's try this. You don't have to sign up for this the rest of your life, but what if you spent the first 15 minutes after you came in the door just checking in with each other on how the day went? And that 15 minutes went to 25, 30 minutes each evening before dinner, before anything else happened. They came in the door, they grabbed a cup of tea, sat on the back porch, and talked about how the day had gone. And then what would it look like to have just kind of a meeting each week to make sure that you're on the same page with, the finances and the calendar and kind of talk about, so how are we with this connection thing? And so we were probably 3 or 4 months in, and they said, hey, you know what? We've decided to do a recommitment ceremony. Would you do that? And so I led their recommitment ceremony, which was basically me talking about what it means to be a team again, not to lose yourself to the relationship, but to bring yourself into the relationship, decide how you want to show up. I still get a card on their anniversary each year. They send me a card talking about how they're still together and still working through. And this was quite the change. I've had a couple
Yeah.
of times when people came in and said, just got to let you know, we're not here for our marriage. We're here for some other reason. But we have created a business relationship. And I'm like, that business relationship is not going to work long term. And so eventually we would round back to their relationship. And same kind of transformation where they're now
Yeah.
like, yep, I treasure this person. I treasure our connection and our relationship. And that's because I now put into the relationship. I'm not looking at
Mm,
what do I get out of the relationship, but what do I need to
yeah.
put into the relationship? And that's a major shift.
Yeah, absolutely. No, isn't that, I mean, that is again, that's a sort of phrase, a simple twist of fate, the sense of like at the time that it was, where they see your sign and decide to walk in but isn't it again that sort of the wonderful sort of what people can change? Because when they're willing, if you're willing to sort of let your, I don't know if it's to let your guard down or let your sort of be the vulnerability piece, isn't it? It's like as opposed to trying to prove the other one, blame the other person, admit where you can put things, where you didn't do things and how you can do it. What could you do more? And also I think, as you say, put it into them, the relationship's got paused and try to almost not absolve, but sort of like it's just happened. Because if you keep trying to find, and this is the exact moment it was, and it was actually you who did that, it wasn't me. It's just the spiral of blame. It keeps going. You kind of like there has to be a point of whether it's acceptance or forgiveness of oneself or of each other. Of like that's what happened. It's sort of like we're in this place now, but what do we do to get out of it? Because if you keep trying to pinpoint and find and figure out the person to blame, then you'll just keep going. But if both people are willing to sort of, well, I'll go back all in. It's amazing the results that you can get.
So when I realized this pause button thing,
Yeah.
one of the things that is true about it is nobody set out to do it.
Yes.
It just made sense, right? And
Yeah.
so then what do? Is you're taking responsibility to step back in, or to kind of put an odd combination of words together. You're accepting blameless responsibility, meaning neither one of us are guilty of consciously trying to destroy this relationship, but we can take responsibility for moving forward. And that's so the term responsibility is one of my favorite words. Responsibility. It's the ability
Yeah.
to respond, to change our
Yep.
response, right? And so I often use the analogy, if your house is on fire and you're standing in the middle of it, the most useless thing you can do is to ask the question, who caused this? The question is, what do I do to get as much out? What do we do together to get as much out and to safety as we can? How do we get to safety? That's a responsibility. I have an ability to respond rather than blaming. I can say, what do we do from here? And so if the relationship is on fire, does no good to say it's your fault, because each person will only point back to something earlier. I used to
Yes.
watch people, they'd come into my office and say, this is because of this. And this is what this other person did. And the other person would say, yeah, but that's because you did this. And they would go, yeah, but that's because you did this. And I'm pretty sure if I let it go, we would go all the way back to the moment they met, if not earlier. Sometimes it even was about how your family raised you and things like that that would get,
Yeah.
intermingled in there. And at some point you have to say, okay, yeah, we're here. Here is where we are. Now, where do we want to go? And that's
Yeah.
the question of recovery. Where do we want to go? And how do I want to show up to the process to move forward?
Absolutely. Obviously, you've been doing it for a number of years, and just from the conversation today, and I can see how much it obviously means to you personally. What is it? I mean, what? It may be a silly question, maybe not, but what do you get out of it from the work that you do?
I know the damage that's done. I've watched it firsthand.
Mm,
And I know the damage that's done on multi generations. And so a big piece of it for me is seeing that things change for people, seeing what happens after the fact.
yeah.
And these couples that I told you about, whether it's we have a business relationship or we are completely broken and on the way out, to watch them now functioning and to be in a different relationship with the same person is very important.
Yes.
But watching what happens when people struggle through that, watching what they lose of themselves, of lots of other practical things, it just seems so costly. And
Yeah.
so what gives me meaning is when I see people who are able to find a different way forward. Many times I'll have people say, "Oh, thank you so much for your help." And I'm like, you know what? You did it. I could
Yes.
point the way, but you still got to do it. And
Yes.
good for you for doing it, because it's always impressive for me to watch people to take action, to do something and to
Yeah.
show up differently.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, yeah, I can imagine the sort of how sort of fulfilling, as you say, when, especially that couple you mentioned, and there's, the fact that now that they're still together, the ones that turned up, and while we're on the way to basically the courthouse or whatever it is to end this, and the fact that they're still together. There's you were reminded as you were talking about that. I don't know if you've heard of it. There's an English comedian. His name's John Bishop, and he a stand-up comic, and his kind of his life has been inspired for a movie that was just out recently. I can't remember the name of it, but he tells the story of how him and his wife got together quite young. They had the three children, I think the three boys, and he was in the sort of marketing type world and pharmaceuticals. I think that's what his job was. And very much like you were talking about, the marriage was just drifting apart and drifting apart. And they were to the point of separated and about to get divorced. And he was on his own during the week. Kids at the weekend. And he tells a story on a Monday night. He was like, "What am I going to do?" So he goes to a friend of him said about going to a comedy club. So he goes to this, and it was an open mic night at the comedy club. And they were like, "Oh, you can either pay in or you could put your name down and talk." And he's like, "Well, what do you?" So he was like, "Oh, there's only going to be a few. No, there's going to be so many people in there. I won't get called up." He goes into the club, and his name gets pulled out because there's only about 10 people in the club. And he basically talks about how his marriage is breaking down and how he's about to get divorced. The the lads or the MCs at the club go, "Actually, you're quite good. Where do you do your stand up?" He's like, "I've never done it before in my life." Well, he's like, "Oh, keep coming back." And so he keeps doing this, doing stand up because he's got nothing else to do. The kids and the wife aren't there. Him and his wife are literally getting to the point of dividing everything up. He's doing a gig. His wife turns up to the gig with friends, and he's doing a piece about the marriage, and then sees his wife in the audience. After the gig is over, she comes and talks to him, and she says, "That's who I basically fell in love with, the guy on the stage." And then they went to sort of counseling, therapy and stuff, and they're still together. So and that's been inspired into a movie like now with that sort of premise of what happened. But it just, when you were talking about just reminding how people, it was blameless in a sense of they were trying to live their lives, of trying to exist, to work, to rear children, all the rest of it. And it drifted and the relationship was paused. So it's what you said to me when it was reminding of that story is the intentionality of working on the relationship. Because I think people get lost sometimes thinking about they're doing the career for the other person. Or I need to earn as much money to support XYZ. But forgetting it's like, well, that's a financial side of stuff. But you're getting so caught up on these things that you think are really important. You're missing so much of life. You know what I mean? It's like there's a word that comes up all the time when I talk to people about being authentic or authenticity. And I think sometimes when we don't have those regular check-ins that you were talking about, those conversations, those chats of how are you, not what did you do, how was your day? How was your, tell me about how are you, how are things at the moment? If we're just going on purely doing stuff for the sake of it, that pause is on the whole time. And you're losing that authenticity in yourself as an individual, as a collective, because you that is again that word you said earlier, connection. You're almost two individuals drifting apart. So it's like, if you coming back to the point, it's like if you really are wanting to be authentic and be yourself, you've got to be it with the most supposedly intimate person you're with. Does
Hmm.
that make sense?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that authenticity is a key part of showing up, right? If you're not showing
Yeah.
up authentically, you're not showing up.
Yeah.
If you're not showing up, there is no authenticity. I mean, those go hand
Mm,
in hand. How you show up
absolutely.
is tied to that authenticity and the other way around. So part of being willing to be authentic is
Mm,
how we show up. And that means that, one of the things that people often talk about is you got to be vulnerable.
mm,
And vulnerable feels scary to people. Authentic is has to include that, but it doesn't
yes.
feel so, I don't know, like I'm rolling over and going, yeah, do whatever you want. It's I'm actually showing
Yes.
up as my full self. And that
Yes.
includes both sides of it. So a great word and a great way of encapsulating what it means to show up in the relationship.
Absolutely. Leah, it's been a real pleasure to chat to you and learn about what you do and obviously the importance of what you do. I have a few more questions for you that I like to close with everyone. So the first one is there a quote or a phrase that's important to you?
Yeah. So Ray Kroc, who founded McDonald's, whether you like McDonald's or not, Ray Kroc had a great quote, which is "You're either green and growing or ripe and rotting." And for me, that encapsulates what we're here to do is to continue to grow for our entire life. So you're either green and growing or ripe and rotting.
I love that one. That's a really good one because yeah, no, because everyone because you can think the person that thinks the ripe piece is the sort of like the sort of I'm done, isn't it?
Yeah, I've
No more to
arrived.
do.
Yeah.
I've arrived. Exactly. I've solved this thing. Yeah, yeah. I get that. That's a lovely. I haven't had that one before. That's fantastic. Who would you say have been the biggest influences in your life?
So I guess I'm going to use a interesting direct one. Watching my parents has been a huge influence. My grandparents were also big influences. Professionally, I've had a number of mentors that really meant a lot. In that this kind of the self help world, Jack Canfield's one of the people that I've often turned to, and so a number of people, most of them being family and close to me, but there are others.
Yeah, love it. Yeah, and I think I what I love about that as well because of so many people have said obviously family, and I can see obviously the sort of that sort of influence, but also role modeling thing as well. Like and I think sometimes I think when we can it's not to say that you can't be influenced by people outside or family or in the public eye, but sometimes it's so much closer to home than people realize. And there may be a pushback thinking, oh, I don't want to be influenced by it. And I can get that from a more of a younger age and that. But I think they can have such a positive influence versus always trying to poke out the negatives is what we tend to do with when it comes to family or parents and things. We can definitely take some massive positives as well. Yeah, absolutely. Lee, as I say, it's been wonderful to chat to you. My final question for you is what's important for your future?
So I have had I'm now in the sixth decade of life. I just turned 60 not long ago, and so our person who does our financial planning was like, "So what's retirement look like?" And I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't plan on doing that. I
Yeah,
mean, I might
yeah,
have to
yeah,
at some point, but my thing is that we're here to do something. We're here to leave the world better than we found it. And that is based in doing meaningful, purposeful things. And so, what's important to
yeah.
me is continuing to do meaningful, purposeful things to help make the world a better place.
Love it. Love it. Absolutely. As I say, thank you so much for talking to me, Lee. It's been
Thank you.
wonderful to chat to you. Yeah, I want to make sure that people continue to learn about you and you continue to help other people as you do. So we'll make sure any links are in the show notes. But if you would like to give a shout out now where people can follow and connect with you online.
Best place to do it is at savethemarriage.com. That has my podcast and link to my books and link to my program. So savethemarriage.com would be a great place to start.
Fantastic. We'll make sure that's in the show notes. Lee, thanks again for chatting to me today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to What's Important to You. If you enjoyed this episode, follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if it resonated, share it with someone who might need it too. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment or ask a question, and let's keep the conversation going. I'm James Dean, and I'll be back soon with another real conversation to help you reconnect with what truly matters. Until then, take care and stay curious.